Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's session presented by the AIA on HR fall cleaning. A few housekeeping items I want to talk about first before we get started. First one is on the right-hand side there, you should see a place where you can enter questions. We are going to take questions in the question box as a way to prevent too many interruptions as we move forward with the presentation. So please feel free to enter your questions. We might just wait till the end to answer those questions. Again, just to make sure that this is a seamless process for all of you. And then should there be any personal confidential questions you don't feel comfortable sharing on today's session, we also are a resource that you can reach out to and we can talk to you one-on-one. Secondly, there will be a survey sent out after today's session, so please take the time to complete that. If you enter your AIA number, you will get your LU credits that you need. And we always look forward to the feedback because it helps us continue to grow and improve, and it also helps with making sure that we're talking about the topics that are most meaningful for you and maybe some of the challenges or bumps that you're facing in your companies and businesses. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started here. So, I don't know where the term ever was coined for lazy dog days of summer or whatever, but I find that summer is busy for me. With so many outdoor activities, I tend to look forward to fall and winter where I can become a little more lazy and watch the movies on the couch. But really, this is a critical time for all of us in HR. It's a time for us to dust off those old policies, and we're going to dig into those a little bit more as we move throughout the next couple of slides, because there are some fall-related topics, there's some winter-related topics, and it's just a good opportunity as we're closing out 2017, I can't believe I'm saying that, and thinking about what 2018 might hold. We might be making some different business decisions. Maybe we're in growth mode, maybe we're restructuring, maybe there's a couple other variables that could be impacting our organization. So it is normal and a best practice that I like to recommend is just reevaluate your policies, procedures on an annual basis and say, hey, is this how we are still continuing to do business? Is this how we're going to, do business in the future? Because like technology, things can change rapidly from one moment to the next. So let's go ahead and take a look at our first policy here that I want to focus on. And I want to take a look at a flexible work schedule, and I don't mean where people can just decide when and if they want to work that day. I don't mean that in any capacity, but there are companies out there who have chosen to be a little more flexible with work schedules throughout the summer. So what does that look like, especially if you have done this for the first time this year, where you let people leave a little early on Fridays or work 4 10-hour days? Is this something that you want to continue to offer to your employees? Does it make sense from a business perspective that they have the ability to be a little flexible with the hours that they report to work? And I don't have the crystal ball to give you that answer right here and now, but it is something that you should think about and consider. Is that something we want to do going forward? So as our kids are going back to school, and if you don't have kids in school, you'll still be impacted potentially by the buses and the route that you drive on the way to work. But, we would like to be that employer who provides that balance between work and life, because it's no longer just about an employee and focusing on what they are, during the time that they're here at our organizations, but more about, what else is going on in their life and what can we do as an organization to be a little more forgiving or accommodating to them to balance that work-life commitments that they have. So thinking about kids going back to school, that first day of school, I know as a mother, I always wanted to be there to send my daughter off to school on that first day, which a lot of times was after the time period of when I needed to report to work. So giving employees the ability to maybe come in a little late or shift their schedule in a way that allows them to be there for those memories, because once it's gone, it's gone. What about sporting events? Fall is a very popular time for sports, whether it's football, soccer, field hockey, etc. It could conflict with the work hours that an employee is in your building. And does it make sense that they come in a little early so they can leave early to be at every single practice or every single game that they have on the schedule for the next couple of months? What about some of those parents who enjoy coaching as part of, being a part of their child's life? And how can we as an organization maybe support that? And, in some cases, it's not going to be able to be accommodated just because of the way that the, company demands may come forward and the different types of client projects you might be working on or customer orders, etc. What about holiday concerts? As we look forward to, November, December, kids are usually having their chorus concerts around that time period. And what's going to be our policy on that? What about inclement weather? I don't know about you, but this week on Facebook I did see that the Farmer's Almanac came out, and here in Pennsylvania I think can kind of go on either side of that. We either believe it or we don't, or we say, hey, who knows what's going to happen. But depending on where you're at in the country, you might have to think about inclement weather more so than other areas. And what does that look like? We definitely are going to peel that back further on some additional slides here, but thinking about flexibility of an employee's work schedule, and if there are weather conditions that aren't quite favorable, what does that look like? And what would we expect employees to do? And what are things we will or will not tolerate? So let's talk further about that. Let's talk about inclement weather and some of the challenges we face as Mother Nature decides to give us some snow or whatever that might be. So think about compensation. Think about your employees from a salary basis versus an hourly basis, those who do or don't receive overtime. So if we think about those individuals who are salary exempt, they earn the same amount from week to week. They do not get overtime. If they come into work for an hour or two and then their child's school closes and they have to leave to go pick them up, you have to pay them for that full day. Because they did arrive to work and they did work at least 1 minute of the day, they do have to be compensated. Now, you as the employer have the ability to demand that they make up that time, whether they do it that same day, working later in the evening, or maybe come in on Saturday, etc. You do have the ability, but I do encourage you to be proactive with that. Don't just do knee-jerk reaction when you're in the heat of the moment, the snowstorm's coming, and now you want to place those demands on employees. That way they know what to expect, and hopefully it'll prevent some of the big waves of questions that might come knocking on your door. And I'm going to assume that most of you have probably HR responsibilities who are on this call, and that's the way I'm going to gear this conversation, that you would be the point person that employees would come to seek out information or to help them better understand the company's rules and policies and so forth. So if we take a look at an hourly employee, that's going to look differently. Because if an employee shows up to work and they leave early, we don't have to pay them for the time that they didn't work. And you're adhering to all of the Department of Labor's rules and regulations by enforcing that policy or that rule. Now, where it might be something that you deviate from that norm is if the company shuts down and does not allow employees to come into work. So what if the furnace breaks? What if there's a sheet of ice in the parking lot? And what's going to be your approach to paying employees who are hourly that would be able to make it there because they have four-wheel drive and could work? How are you going to accommodate them? Are you going to guide them to maybe file for unemployment and get some of that missed compensation? Are you going to provide them the opportunity to maybe work extra later in that day or on the weekend to make up those hours? And those are all unknowns, and it's going to vary from organization to organization. I just encourage you to think about that now and communicate out what your expectations are. What flexibility are you going to offer? Can you offer? And what are things that you just can't negotiate on just because of the nature of your business? And that's why the second bullet point here is so very important, because what does your communication strategy look like? How can you present a majority of the questions from, not flooding your doorway the first time that the snow starts to fall and they see that, first snowflake, if you will. I did see a question pop up here. I'm going to go ahead and just answer this question if it's okay, because it's related to exempt employees. Can you require that they make their day whole by using their PTO, etc.? You certainly could, but it has to be communicated in a policy. And I don't know what your policy is currently and whether or not it's included, but might be something you want to consider updating in your handbook, or if you have a separate policy document, so you can give that clarity ahead of time. You certainly have the ability to do that. Not sure how many employees would have time available in December because they probably burned through all their PTO, throughout the summer months. And conversely, they may end up eating up a lot of it in January, preventing them from having enough to take vacation over the summer, and what does that look like? So working through a couple of those scenarios and laying it out and then crafting your message accordingly is going to be very important, just so you can set those expectations and employees can truly understand what to expect as we move through some of these snowstorms that might be on the horizon. What about holiday concerts? If an employee says, hey, can I leave early and they're hourly, are you going to let them use their PTO? Do they just need to take it without pay? Salary exempt employees, again, is very similar to inclement weather in that, are they just going to make up the time? Is there an expectation to make up that time? Or, will they just make up that time in other weeks throughout the year because they normally work in excess of 40 hours? So I do apologize, there's a little bit of repeat here on these bullet points, but essentially, just making sure that we are proactive with our messaging on inclement weather so employees know what to expect. So what about emergencies that might pop up throughout the rest of the year as we look at maybe, closing the building because of snowstorm, or loss of power or loss of furnace because of, technical difficulties, etc. What does that look like? What is the action plan? Who's going to contact who? Is it the supervisor responsibility to reach out and get in touch with the employees? Do you have a general call-in number that employees will, dial into to get the information they need? Are you going to send it by text message, by email, by Facebook, by Twitter? What does that look like? Will that cover all employees to make sure that everybody has been reached? Are you going to utilize a multiple communication strategy when communicating emergencies? And what does that phone tree look like? Is it done by phone call? Is it done by text message? And just making sure that we have updated information in our systems that we can reach out to employees as quickly as possible upon notification that there's an emergency, that their work could be hindered, or business operations are going to be disrupted for a certain period of time. And not only do we want to look at it from an employee standpoint, what that might look like, but what does it look like from an external perspective? So if you have freight companies coming to pick up product, or you're expecting deliveries of product, what about your clients who might not be from this area of the country, and their expectation is that they should be able to get service because they're in a sunny place, warm, where they don't even use furnaces throughout the year. So, anticipating those individual stakeholders who might be impacted by a service disruption, by an emergency at your company, a snowstorm, etc., and working through those different case studies or scenarios to determine, what communication can we send out now in advance to set those expectations for impacted individuals. And you'll probably hear a common theme from me throughout this. You probably already picked up on it, especially if you're good at identifying patterns, but setting expectations is so critically important. It really gives you the advantage, if you will, on establishing the rules, the guidelines, etc. And nobody expects you to be perfect. Nobody expects you to perfectly outline every scenario that you could encounter. However, if we can reduce the amount of unknowns to less than 20%, I'd say we're in pretty good shape. And being flexible, being accommodating, and being approachable are critical as you move through, some of these different types of scenarios. Is just, do employees have a place that they can go to get clarification if they need it? And have we done a good enough job communicating out to them? So as we look at, continuing to evaluate our policies, another one that comes to mind as we think about different emergencies that come up throughout the fall and winter is safety. So what does your process look like for reporting injuries? Employees walking across the parking lot, they accidentally slip on a patch of ice, fall, and become injured. What does that look like? Who do they report that injury to? What's the time frame that we as an organization expect them to report that? And then what does it look like from that point forward? Are they taken to urgent care? Or is 911 called? What does that whole process look like if we do have an individual who becomes injured on our property? And it's not always just an employee. It could be a client, could be a vendor, could be, somebody just passing through that becomes injured on your property. So it's very important that we treat icy sidewalks promptly and quickly, that we make sure wet floors are labeled as such and cleaned up to the best of our ability, and just making sure that we as an organization are putting safety first and making sure that we have all of the protections in place that we possibly could to avoid maybe injury or illness, etc. And so also another element of this is the work comp, reporting that claim to your worker comp insurance to make sure that you get them the information timely and there's no disruption to the care that an individual might receive should they be waiting at urgent care. Transportation is another critical item that we need to be aware of. So if somebody becomes injured and we try to be the good citizen and transport them to get care, is that covered? What if we're then in an accident as we're driving to the urgent care? And I know I might be painting the picture pretty bleak, and you're probably thinking, well, what are the chances of that? Well, it's probably pretty slim, but what if it does happen? Are we protected? Do we have the coverage in place to protect the individual who's driving the person to the urgent care? And is that something we even want to take responsibility for? Maybe not. Maybe we truly just want to call 911 and let the authorities handle it and, trust in them to transport individuals where they need to go. And then communication back to family members. What does that look like? Do we have emergency contact information on file for all of our employees? Is it current? Have we evaluated that in the past year? If not, put that on your to-do list. It's a great item to, get employees just to review and verify that it is still accurate or provide us with updated information. So, unfortunately, we have to deal with the flu season, which will be upon us very shortly. I'm surprised I haven't seen Walgreens put up their sign yet with flu shots, and if they have, I just haven't seen it. But what does that look like? We certainly want to make sure that employees are protected and that they feel well when they come to work. I know growing up, it was really about a suck it up buttercup. You just continue to work, go to work, get things done, and then rest in the evening. And I don't know that that's the right approach in today's environment. Certainly I don't want somebody with the flu or cold or stomach virus coming in here and making me sick and infecting the rest of the workforce. So, what's your policy on that, and what's your tolerance level, and how flexible are you going to be? Are you going to take a hard line where they have to show up no matter what, or are you going to say, hey, don't even come in. You have the ability to work remotely, and I don't want to see you until you're feeling better. So neither one's right, wrong, or indifferent. It's just really about what's your company's philosophy and setting that expectation, because employees might be fearful. If they don't know, then they're not going to know what safely they could do as far as an option. Can they take off without any retribution? And how would that look if they did take off? I know that employees are very concerned about that. They just don't want anything to go negatively against them. Sometimes might sacrifice in an effort to keep their image whole with the organization. As far as flu shots, is that something you as a company are going to offer? I know here at Stan Boness in the past, we've offered employees the ability either to participate in a flu shot session here on site, or we've I believe provided reimbursement if you decide that you want to go to your family physician or to Walgreens or so forth. So that's something you want to encourage employees to do, to try to be more preventive and maybe avoid getting the flu at all. And what does sick pay look like? How is that treated? Is it clearly defined in your policy and procedure as to the amount of time they can take off? And do you require them to get a doctor's note? And at what interval? Is it for every day that they call out they have to have a doctor's note, or do you have a tolerance of 2 or 3 business days? So those are all the things that you should be thinking about. You know, are our policies clearly defined? Do they set the proper expectations that align with our current company philosophy? And it may have changed over time, just with change in leadership, change in just the way we like to conduct business, and a change in the way we want to conduct business in the future. And it's okay to change that. Just make sure that you update the policies accordingly so employees know what to expect, and they have a place to go to be able to read what to expect. So just give those some thoughts as you're moving forward, evaluating, and maybe dusting off your policies. So what are some other things that we should be thinking about as we approach the end of the year? This is a very common time for benefit open enrollment. So this is where we take a look at what we currently offer. We meet with our broker and evaluate what are the options out there, what are the price points out there, what makes sense for the company going forward, how does that align with our budget, and ultimately what are the decisions we need to make surrounding that, and how do we communicate it out in a timely fashion so employees can make any changes to the types of coverage that they have, and ultimately we want to avoid any disruptions to their coverage. And as you approach benefit open enrollment, we had a webinar recently talking about exactly that. What should you expect of your broker? Are you being serviced properly? And if you have any questions or any doubts about the level of service you're receiving, let us know, because that definitely is something that I'm passionate about. I have a certain standard as to what companies should receive as far as a service from their broker, and if they're not, my heart aches, and I definitely want to make sure that you do get the service you desire and deserve, and we can help you elevate that level of service with your current broker or help you find maybe a better match. So that's definitely something you want to keep in the back of your mind as you're approaching your open enrollment is, am I getting the best service for the money that I'm investing in my program? And certainly one thing before I move on to payroll provider evaluation is just think about maybe doing a survey internally with your employees and find out, are you offering the benefits that are most meaningful to them? There's no sense wasting money on benefits that aren't being utilized. Flexible spending account, if you have 1 participant and you have 30 employees, maybe it's not worth the administrative burden that you incur each month to offer that program because it's not being utilized. And take a look at each benefit package that you offer and see if it makes sense. And asking employees to participate, they'll feel more engaged because then they'll know that their voice was heard as you're making these decisions moving towards your open enrollment. And we will go ahead and talk about ACA a little bit later, so I'm going to hold on that for now. But similarly, this time of year is very common for companies to make a switch in their payroll provider, and that decision is oftentimes driven by 3 different factors. Client service, so the type of service, level of service that they're receiving from their provider. It could be functionality or capabilities within the software. Could prompt a company to decide to change. And cost is another significant driver that sometimes causes companies to take a look at, what are they currently paying, what are the services they're getting for that amount they're paying, and what system functionality do they receive along with that package. And, there might be another provider out there providing something slightly better or significantly different that you as an organization might be able to better leverage into the future. So it's not a bad thing to take a look at payroll providers, to meet with a few different companies. I never encourage you just to meet with one, and I definitely think 2 or 3 are sufficient. More than that, it might muddy the water a little bit, but do your research and homework and meet with a couple companies, and there's no commitment required. You definitely don't have to make that switch at the end of the evaluation. You might determine, hey, we're in the best spot possible right now for our organization. So January 1st is probably the most common time to switch because it's a break in a quarter, it's a break in the year, and it's a clean cut for pay history, W-2 purposes, and so forth. But don't feel compelled that you have to switch exactly then either, because Usually payroll providers have a high volume of people switching at that time, so you'll be in that large mass of people trying to switch payroll. Maybe you could benefit by switching in November or December. So just keep that in the back of your mind as you're moving forward, and if you haven't looked at that in a couple of years, you just might want to do that. You'll be able to save some money that you could then reinvest in the benefits or another area of the organization. As you think about year-end bonuses, what does that look like? Is it something that's expected? Is it something that hasn't been done before or has consistently been done? Is it something that the company is going to consider doing again? I know a lot of times there can be kind of some tension if it's always been done and this is the year that we have to make the decision that we can't do it or we can't do it to the level that we've done in previous years. So really setting the stage now with employees about the financial position of the company is important, so that way they can plan accordingly. Year-end bonuses a lot of times are used to help buy gifts for the various different religions and celebrations around that time of year. So if somebody's really counting on that and then they come to find out in December that they can't, we really didn't give them an opportunity to be able to plan or prepare for maybe the reduction in income in the last few months of the year. And while we all know as professionals that no bonus is ever guaranteed, unfortunately you do have employees who see the pattern that has consistently been done in the past and they just make assumptions and then kind of develop a sense of entitlement that it's going to be there. And so let's get on the front side of that. Let's communicate and be honest, transparent, open, and be realistic so that way we can set those expectations. Fringe benefits is another area that a lot of companies struggle with. It's either a lack of understanding or they just react to it at the end of the year like, oh crap, we forgot, we need to put this on the W-2. And it becomes one of those painful things that's handled either on the last paycheck of the year or they're scrambling in January to make an adjustment so it can be reflected on the W-2. So I really encourage you to start talking about that November at the latest. Fringe benefits, I'm talking about personal use of company car, the fringe benefit that needs to be recorded for S Corp Health, and there's a variety of other ones that need to be recorded as taxable income and shown on the W-2. So I encourage you, whether we help you with your accounting or payroll, or if you lean on somebody else, please reach out to them and start talking about that now. It's never too soon to do that. So let's talk about holidays. There's definitely a lot of different holidays that are recognized throughout the remainder of 2017. And while as HR professionals we can't exclude or include, etc., based upon individuals' religious or other preferences surrounding holidays and so forth. But the one thing that we can do as an organization is we can communicate what the company paid holidays are, making sure employees understand when the business will be closed, how their compensation will be handled surrounding those closures, if there is any compensation to be paid. And then, think about the days leading up or immediately following those company paid holidays. As people try to burn out any remaining vacation or PTO time, they might be looking to pair it up with a company paid holiday as a way to extend the time off. So they might want to take Friday, December 22nd off, knowing that the company's closed on Monday the 25th, and have a 4-day weekend instead of a 3-day weekend. And what does that mean? What if they become sick during that time frame? Do you have a policy where they have to work the day before and the day after a holiday? And if so, what if they become sick? Does that rule still apply? What if it's a scheduled vacation day in advance? Does that rule still apply? What about work volumes? You're probably already studying your pipeline, maybe not you as an individual, but your company is probably looking at sales pipeline and the different work volumes as a result of that, and how is that going to impact the holiday season? Are employees going to be expected to work overtime? Can you give any insight into that for them so they know to be maybe a little light with planning their family functions and maybe push some of them out to January? So those are key considerations to keep in the back of your mind. And then looking at pay dates Fortunately, Fridays this year don't fall on one of those major bank holidays, so that's a good thing. We don't have to worry about doing the day before, the day after. But if you are an organization that typically pays payroll on maybe the 25th of each month, you might have to pay now on the 22nd of December instead of the 25th. And just really looking forward and planning out, when are you going to process payroll? What does that mean to the employees? When can they expect their direct deposit? When can they expect their live check to pick it up? Is there anything that could hinder them from getting their paycheck? Just want to communicate that ahead of time, any disruptions that you might anticipate with them being paid during the holiday season. So let's go ahead and shift gears a little bit. We're making good time. We're going to talk for the remainder of the time here about compliance with respect to the end of the year. I have some passionate thoughts in this area. So, I'll try to leave 10 minutes or so at the end of this webinar to be able to entertain any questions that might come in. And certainly, I encourage you to submit those questions. It's great discussion points because it might be something that somebody else is thinking and just didn't, enter it into the system. So from a compliance perspective, is your organization at risk? And the areas that I want to highlight today are listed here in no particular order. First being 401k contributions. Had a few recent examples I want to share with you about this on the call today. I-9 forms, that is a big topic of discussion, so we'll dig into that a little bit more. As I promised, we will talk about the Affordable Care Act. Travel pay and employee classification are other important topics I felt important to call out as we're looking at, our fall cleaning and the things that we should have at the top of our mind from a compliance standpoint. So the purpose of this slide here really isn't to dig into the details on the image. It really was just to demonstrate, hey, there are certain limits with the 401k or IRA contributions, and do you have individuals in your organization? And typically I've found it's usually the higher earners or those individuals who are closer to retirement, maybe in their mid-50s, mid to upper 50s, who may want to take advantage of the full amount allowable that they could defer into their retirement plan. So for 2017, individuals could elect up to $18,000 and contribute them to their 401k plan. And if they qualify, there's an additional $6,000 worth of catch-up dollars that they could invest as well. So as you go through here, there's different limits based upon the different type of plan. Like I said, that's not the important point for this conversation, but more so about us reaching out to those individuals to say, hey, are there any changes to your deferrals on a per pay basis that you want to make to be able to maximize the amount that you're eligible to contribute? And they might actually take you up on that. So think about, reaching out to those individuals, and it doesn't hurt to send this out to the whole company. That way you're not seen as discriminating in any way. Knowing who likely is to participate is one thing, but yeah, communicate that out and let employees know, hey, take advantage of this. Reduce your taxable income, less that at the end of the year, hopefully they'll owe to the IRS, especially if they didn't withhold enough. And recently, within the past month, I've bumped into several clients who have not been removing their contributions the way that they're supposed to. And what I mean by that, these companies were smaller businesses who were remitting their 401k contributions on a monthly basis. And they, firmly said, and we're doing it by the 15th of the following month. Well, historically, that would have been okay, but several years ago, the Department of Labor changed the name of the game. And so what the Department of Labor says is that you really should be remitting the contributions within a reasonable time frame. And typically, they use the check date as a measure of what is reasonable. So if you have less than 100 employees, you fall into this safe harbor protection, which allows you to remit those contributions up to 7 business days after that point of which it would have been withheld, so your pay period, your pay date. However, if you have more than 100 employees, you should be remitting that, in a timely fashion. And usually check date, again, is that measure of timeliness. So if you regularly do it on check date and then you decide to slip up for a couple weeks and you do it, maybe by the 5th or 7th business day afterwards, you could get in trouble for doing that because you've demonstrated that you have the ability to remit by check date, but yet there were times that you didn't do that. So I encourage you to talk to somebody who works with you regularly about your retirement plan, evaluate whether or not you are remitting correctly and timely, because there are significant consequences when you don't. So wanted to throw that out there. Hopefully all of you are compliant and it's a non-issue, but if not, definitely make sure to make the necessary changes to be compliant. We don't want the Department of Labor coming in for any reason. We definitely don't want to give them an easy reason to pick on us as an organization and come in and start looking at our files and poking around. Which relates to I-9 compliance. As many of you are aware, there's a lot of attention being placed on immigration and people's eligibility to work in the United States. So far as the government is looking to hire 10,000 people specifically to focus in this area. And what that means to you and I is that if they hire that number or level of people, what we can be assured is that they're probably going to increase their audit efforts. And what that means is they'll come into organizations and they'll be reviewing our I-9 practices. And there could be significant penalties and interest surrounding that type of audit if we're found to be out of compliance. So one thing that you need to be mindful of is, yes, we have another new form. Typically, the Department of Homeland Security doesn't normally issue more than one in a year, but this year they decided to do it twice. So January, a new form went into effect. If you're not using that one, make sure you're using it now. And then again in September, we're going to have a new form that goes into effect. And they really looked to make a few minor changes. I guess one of the most notable is related to the timing as to when the individual needs to complete this. So on prior versions of the form, you had until the end of the business day, of the first day of employment, and a couple additional days to make sure to get everything tidied up. But now they're saying that, that first day of employment, so they really took off the end of the business day, and now they're focusing on it needs to be done pretty much right away when that individual is hired. So again, there were a few minor other changes, nothing significant, but you definitely want to make sure that you use the form that has expired, with that new date. I just don't know what that new date is yet. And, as I said, there will be increased attention. Certainly completeness and accuracy are critical with these forms. One minor field that's not completed could be $100. And so you could see at least $1,000 per form. And it's not just on active employees. So let's carry this calculation forward a little bit. I have 30 active employees. I have 15 terminated who terminated in the past several years and so forth. That's 45 employees, $1,000 per form, that's $45,000. I don't know about you, but I can find much better ways to spend that $45,000 than turning it over to the government because my I-9s were not complete or accurate. So there are definitely significant penalties. There is a scale of penalties, if you will, depending on the type of error, and certainly if there's gross negligence, the sky's the limit, really, on the fines and penalties and so forth. And then, should you be facing a significant bill from the Department of Homeland Security, you might want to, enlist an attorney to help you. Well, now you've just added additional fees to what potentially is your exposure from a cash flow standpoint, of fines and penalties, etc. So I don't want to beat this up too much, but it is really important. I'm really concerned about this for many companies who don't have good practices in place or who had poor practices in the past, that they could definitely be negatively impacted. So as we look at ACA and our responsibilities, Kaylee is here helping me. She said there's a question that came in, so we're going to coordinate getting an answer to that in a little bit. But let's look at ACA and what are our responsibilities. There's nothing new here. Some of you may be saying, hey, I already know what's going on. And some of you may not be aware, especially if you had less than 50 full-time equivalent employees before, but now in 2017 you've reached that and now have exceeded it because you're in growth mode. So if your organization has less than 50 full-time equivalent employees, this really is not applicable to you. If you do have more than 50 full-time equivalent employees or anticipate getting to that point, you need to be concerned about eligibility and making sure that you're offering coverage to those who are truly eligible. And we're not going to dig into that too much deeper. If you have questions about the eligibility rules and how to manage and maintain that, please reach out to me or your broker, and I'd be happy to talk with you further about that. But you also have to make sure your plans are affordable, that you're offering minimum essential coverage, and that you're adhering to the reporting requirements. Reporting requirements being that your healthcare carrier will be remitting the one version of the form, but you also have a responsibility to remit information to the government as well as to your employees. So these are things that haven't changed. I don't expect any change with these as we continue through 2017. Certainly more information might come available in 2018, but I think the federal government has some other bigger priorities right now that they're handling. And so I think this isn't something we'll see movement on throughout the rest of the year. So travel time is another area where companies sometimes don't know what their responsibility is. And as we look at travel time, we really have to have a firm grasp on what hours worked is, and what is the difference between hours worked and the home to work commute. The time that an employee spends traveling from their house to work to their company is not considered paid time. You don't have to pay them for that time. You don't have to offer reimbursement for mileage and so forth. However, if they report to the office, so let's say here at Stanbaugh Ness, I come to the office in the morning and then I have to travel to a client. The time I spend on the road traveling to the client, I have to be paid for that. And luckily, Stanbaugh Ness does reimburse me for mileage, but that's not a legal obligation. Employees would just have to try to receive credit for that on their tax return at the end of the year. But it's important to know that employees, if they're traveling from job site to job site, or running errands for the company, to the post office, to go pick up supplies, etc., that is all time that has to be paid. Now, I know that the fall is a very busy time for social networking events, business functions. I know here at Stanbaugh Ness we participate in several different events in the fall. And so it's important to understand at what point must we pay for employees when they're out of town for business purposes. Obviously, if it's vacation, there's nothing that needs to be paid. I don't think I should have to say that, but just wanted to clarify. Any time spent traveling in an airplane, etc., as a passenger doesn't have to be paid time, as long as it's outside of normal business hours. If an individual is traveling during normal business hours, they need to be compensated accordingly. You may say, well, what are normal business hours? Well, I would return that question to you and say, well, what are your normal business hours at your organization? Is it 8 to 5? Is it 9 to 6? Is it 7 to 3? Whatever that might look like, that defines what the normal business hours are. And very similarly, when you're looking at networking events, when people are either attending them in town or out of town, what is the purpose of that networking event? Is it that they were invited to a social hour and it was completely voluntary? Or are you requiring them to attend as a way to help increase business and generate maybe some revenue? If it's required, you have to pay them. If it's voluntary and you're not demanding them to go, that doesn't have to be paid. So be very clear on your policy surrounding these types of different scenarios, and make sure employees know what will be or won't be paid. I know this is an area that the Department of Labor is honing in on, so should they come knocking on your door, this is something that they would ask to see. They would say, hey, what's your travel time policy? And you would have to explain it to them, and hopefully you have something in writing to support your practices that you verbally shared with them. And we already talked about traveling between job sites. So should you have additional concerns about travel time, we did draw up a blog on that earlier this year. Feel free to take a look at that. Or if you have specific questions, like I said, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have either during this session or afterwards. Employee classification is another critical area. I know you're probably tired of hearing about it. Department of Labor really kind of pushed us up against the wall last fall, making us make these changes, and then last minute saying, oh, no, we're putting a hold on it for the time being. It certainly has made some movement over the past month or two, but I don't think we're anywhere close to getting a decision. So I wouldn't expect anything until 2018. We were hopeful we would hear something one way or the other as we came towards the end of 2017, but I'm just not confident that Department of Labor will be able to come to an understanding that will meet a majority of the concern that was surrounding the original proposal that was put out there. But what I do know is that employee classification was never something that was changing as part of that legislation, and it's critical that we properly classify our employees, making sure that based upon the duties and the role that they perform, that we classify them appropriately. Is the individual truly an employee or an independent contractor? Are we controlling their work, or do they have the ability to control it themselves? Are we providing the resources and tools, or are they providing their own tools themselves? So those are critical questions that we would need to answer as we work through the different scenarios in our companies. And then similarly, from a duties perspective, do our roles in our company truly qualify as exempt? Meaning, can we pay them salary and not pay them overtime? Or does this individual really, truly not qualify and we need to make them hourly? There's a couple key things that I ask companies as they're kind of on the fence with the role is, does this individual have a degree of science or art, or science or learning, I apologize. Do they regularly make decisions using their own personal judgment and their own discretion? And are they of significance? Do they have responsibility for overseeing other employees or overseeing a function or department or division within an organization? Sometimes those are the critical things that can help you kind of navigate through different scenarios that might be a little bit in the gray zone. And there are a few key tricks with job descriptions and making sure that they do align either way. A few terms that I'll encourage you to maybe use in your job description to help you solidify somebody being exempt would be analyzing or interpreting information. Those two really help to demonstrate individuals using their own discretion and potentially making decisions on their own without having to get approval on every decision that's made. So definitely could spend probably a full half hour talking about this, and I'm hopeful that most of you are already familiar with it. If not, again, let's talk about it and share your questions, and I'm happy to answer. So we are coming down here on the end, and we're just about 10 of, so I did follow through on that commitment of allowing 10 minutes for questions. So Kaylee, what is that one question that we did receive as we were talking about I-9?
So I believe it came in when we were talking about the I-9s, as you said. It says, do existing employees need to complete a new form, and how often should this form be updated?
That is a great question. I'm so glad you answered or asked that. You do not have to get your current employees to sign a new form. So once the new form goes into effect in September, you will use that on any new hire going forward. You do not ever have to get those forms updated unless it is a person here who is on a temporary basis. You might have to re-verify their information to make sure that they continue to keep current their green card, visas, etc., that they might have to ensure that they truly are still eligible to work in the United States.
Any other questions, then? Nothing in the chat.
All right, there are no other questions in the chat, so we'll just wait another minute or so if anybody has thought of a question that you would like to ask. It can be surrounding the policies, it could be surrounding the compliance. These are critical areas that you want to pay attention to as you narrow down on the end of 2017. And if you have another question that's not related, feel free to ask that, because sometimes HR professionals, we see some very interesting scenarios. Okay, well, I don't think we have any other questions. I will give you 10 minutes back in your day. And like I said, there will be a survey coming out. Please provide feedback, and a copy of this presentation will be made available. We have it in the handout section, but typically we do send that out afterwards as well as a follow-up. And I hope that you have a great rest of the day. Thank you.